Welcome to Javel Stories. Before we continue with the story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell to always get notified for upcoming stories, and also share the story with loved ones and friends. Thank you very much. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her parents, David and Linda, stood on the other side, their faces a mixture of concern and frustration. The warm light of the kitchen did little to soften the sharp words being exchanged. "You're not going to that party, Emma. It's not safe," David said firmly, his deep voice reverberating in the small room. Emma groaned, rolling her eyes. "Dad, I'm 16. It's just a party with my friends. Everyone is going to be there. Why can't you trust me for once?" Linda stepped forward, her tone gentler but no less resolute. "Emma, it's not about trust. It's about responsibility. We've heard stories about those parties. Underage drinking, boys who don't know boundaries. Stop treating me like a child." Emma shouted, her voice trembling with anger. Her father's patience snapped. "Enough, Emma. The answer is no. End of discussion." Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the tiled floor. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes as she stormed off, her feet pounding up the stairs. She slammed her bedroom door shut, the sound echoing through the quiet house. Inside her room, Emma threw herself onto her bed, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and hurt. The soft glow of her fairy lights did little to calm her. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. She picked it up to see a string of messages from her friends. "Are you coming? The party is lit. Don't let your parents ruin your life again, Em. Liam is here. He asked about you." Emma's fingers hovered over the screen as she wiped a stray tear from her cheek. She hated the feeling of being trapped, of always having to follow rules that didn't seem fair. Her parents loved her, she knew that, but their protectiveness felt suffocating. "Why can't they just let me live my life?" she whispered to herself. The night outside was still and quiet, the faint sound of crickets chirping carried on the cool breeze. Emma glanced at the window. The idea of sneaking out began to form her mind. She hesitated. Her parents had never given her a reason to doubt their love or judgment. But tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to prove something to herself, to them, to her friends. Slowly, Emma got up and opened her closet. She pulled out a short, shimmering dress that she had bought with her own money, knowing her parents wouldn't approve. She slipped into it, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her reflection in the mirror. The faint hum of guilt stirred in her chest, but it was quickly drowned by the rush of rebellion. She grabbed her phone, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. Pulling the window open, Emma climbed out carefully, her bare feet touching the cool grass below. She paused for a moment, looking back at her house, the warm glow of the living room lights spilling onto the lawn. A pang of doubt hit her, but she shook it off. "This is my life," she whispered, stepping into the darkness. As she walked toward her friend's house, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would change everything. The cool night air brushed against Emma's skin as she walked briskly down the dimly lit street. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the soft hum of street lights and the occasional chirp of crickets her only companions. Her mind raced as she replayed the argument with her parents, each word echoing louder in her thoughts than it had in the kitchen. "They don't understand me," she muttered under her breath, kicking a pebble off the sidewalk. Despite her anger, a tiny voice of doubt whispered in the back of her mind. What if her parents were right? What if the party wasn't worth this rebellion? She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. She needed to prove she could make her own decisions, even if it meant bending the rules. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. "Where are you? You're missing all the fun." It was her best friend, Chloe. Emma's lips curved into a small smile. Chloe always had a way of making her feel like she belonged, even when her own family seemed like strangers. The house she was headed to loomed ahead, its porch light glowing warmly. Chloe's silhouette appeared in the doorway, her phone in hand. "Emma!" Chloe called out in a hushed voice, waving her over. Emma jogged the last few steps to the house, her heart pounding. "I thought your parents would be home." Chloe grinned. "They went out for the night. Told me to be responsible." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "So, Naturally, I'm throwing the biggest party of the year. Emma laughed, though her nerves lingered just beneath the surface. As Chloe ushered her inside, the sound of music and laughter grew louder. The living room was packed. Bodies swayed to the rhythm of the music, the air thick with the smell of cheap cologne and spilled soda. A makeshift bar had been set up on the kitchen counter, where bottles of every shape and size glittered under the harsh fluorescent light. Emma felt a pang of apprehension as she stepped into the chaos. She wasn't used to scenes like this. Chloe grabbed her hand, pulling her deeper into the crowd. "Come on, you have to meet everyone," Chloe shouted over the music. Emma tried to keep up as Chloe weaved through clusters of people. She recognized a few faces from school, but most were strangers. The noise, the lights, the sheer energy of the room, it was overwhelming. "Emma, this is Liam," Chloe said suddenly, stopping in front of a tall guy with dark, messy hair and a confident smirk. Emma felt her cheeks flush. Liam was older, probably in college, and had an air of effortless charm. "Hey," he said, his voice smooth. "Chloe's been hyping you up all night." Emma smiled shyly. Hopefully, she didn't oversell me. "Not possible," Liam replied, flashing a grin that made her stomach flutter. They began talking, their voices blending with the din around them. Liam was funny, quick-witted, and seemed genuinely interested in what Emma had to say. For the first time that night, she started to feel at ease. Hours seemed to melt away as Emma and Liam talked. She lost track of how many times he made her laugh or how many stories he told that left her captivated. But as the night wore on, Liam started drinking more. His jokes became louder, his gestures more exaggerated. Emma noticed the slight slur in his words, the unsteady way he held his glass. "This party's kind of lame, don't you think?" he said suddenly, leaning closer to her. Emma hesitated. "It's okay, I guess." "There's a better one not far from here," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You should come with me." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Part of her was excited. Liam was paying attention to her, singling her out. But another part of her hesitated. "I don't know," she said carefully. "I'm not sure it's a good idea." "Come on," Liam urged, his smile charming but insistent. "Don't be boring. You trust me, right?" Chloe appeared suddenly, handing Liam another drink. "You should go with him, Em. He's the life of every party." Emma glanced between them, her stomach twisting. She wanted to say no, but she didn't want to seem like the awkward, cautious girl her parents had painted her to be. "Okay," she said finally, forcing a smile. "Let's go." The cool night air hit Emma like a splash of water as they stepped outside. Liam led the way to his car, an old beat-up sedan parked at the curb. The street was deserted, and the only sound was the faint thump of music from the house. Emma's unease grew as Liam fumbled with his keys, dropping them twice before finally unlocking the door. "You sure you're okay to drive?" she asked, her voice tentative. Liam laughed, a short, careless sound. "Of course. I've done this a million times." Emma hesitated, her hand hovering over the door handle. A voice in her head screamed at her to turn back, to call Chloe and say she'd changed her mind. But Liam was already inside, revving the engine. He leaned over and opened the passenger door for her. "Come on, don't be scared," he said with a teasing grin. Emma swallowed hard and climbed in. As they pulled onto the highway, Liam's recklessness became apparent. He sped down the empty roads, his hand occasionally leaving the wheel to fiddle with the radio or reach for his drink. Emma clutched her seatbelt, her knuckles white. "Maybe you should slow down," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Liam laughed again, louder this time. "Relax, Em. I've got this." The dark road stretched endlessly ahead, and Emma's chest tightened with every sharp turn and sudden acceleration. She glanced at Liam, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. He looked so confident, so carefree. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were hurtling toward something she couldn't stop. The road was eerily quiet except for the low hum of the engine. The dark night surrounded them, only broken by the occasional passing streetlight. Emma stared out the window, her unease growing. Liam had one hand on the wheel and the other resting lazily on her shoulder. The scent of alcohol lingered in the air, mixing with a faint smell of leather seats. "You know, you're kind of amazing," Liam slurred, his words tumbling out carelessly. Emma forced a tight-lipped smile. Thanks, Liam, but maybe we should focus on the road? Relax, Em, he said with a grin, his eyes flickering away from the road, for just a moment too long. Suddenly, a blinding flash of headlights appeared in front of them. Emma's heart leapt into her throat as the blaring sound of a horn pierced the air. Liam, she screamed, grabbing the dashboard. Liam jerked the wheel, but his reaction was too slow. The last thing Emma saw was the glaring headlights rushing toward them. Then came the deafening crash. Emma opened her eyes to chaos. The world around her was a blur of twisted metal and shattered glass. The smell of smoke and gasoline filled her nose, sharp and suffocating. She tried to move but was pinned by something heavy. Pain shot through her body like a lightning bolt. Her vision swam, and for a moment she thought she might pass out again. Help, she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no response. She turned her head slightly and saw Liam slumped over the wheel, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. The faint sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Emma's thoughts blurred together in a haze of pain and fear. Her parents' faces flashed in her mind, their stern expressions from earlier now replaced with warmth and worry. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears mixing with the blood on her face. The sirens grew louder until flashing red and blue lights illuminated the wreckage. Shadows moved around her as paramedics and firefighters worked quickly to pull her from the wreckage. Emma woke to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of machines. She blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, her body aching with every movement. "Emma, can you hear me?" a soft voice asked. She turned her head slowly to see a nurse standing beside her. The woman's face was kind but lined with worry. "You're in the hospital," the nurse explained gently. "You were in a car accident." Emma's memory came flooding back in a rush. Liam, the crash, the headlights. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her chest and arms. "Don't move too much," the nurse said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What happened to Liam?" Emma managed to ask, her voice hoarse. The nurse hesitated. "I think it's best if the doctor talks to you about that." Emma's heart sank. The look on the nurse's face told her everything she needed to know. Hours passed in a haze of medication and pain. Emma stared at the ceiling, replaying the crash over and over in her mind. The sound of screeching tires, the flash of headlights, Liam's laugh, it all haunted her. A doctor finally entered the room, a clipboard in hand. His expression was calm but serious. "Emma, I need to talk to you about the accident," he said, pulling up a chair beside her bed. She nodded weakly, bracing herself for the worst. "The driver of your car, Liam, didn't survive the crash. He was pronounced dead at the scene." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "And the other car?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor hesitated, his gaze heavy. "The occupants of the other car, a man and a woman, were also killed." "I'm sorry." Emma's world shattered. Her parents' warnings, her decision to get into Liam's car, it all came crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "I killed them," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This is my fault." The doctor reached out to place a hand on her shoulder, but she turned away, burying her face in the pillow. The days that followed were a blur of pain and grief. Emma remained confined to her hospital bed, her body broken and her spirit crushed. Nurses came and went, checking her vitals, administering medication, but she barely registered their presence. One afternoon, the nurse who had first greeted her, Claire, sat down beside her. "Emma," Claire began gently, "is there anyone you'd like me to call? Your parents, maybe?" At the mention of her parents, Emma froze. The memory of their argument before she snuck out replayed in her mind like a cruel joke. They're probably so mad at me," she said quietly. Claire hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I'm sure they're worried about you, Emma. Parents always are." Emma nodded, though a fresh wave of guilt washed over her. She had disobeyed them, stormed out, and now 3 people were dead because of her choices. Later that evening, as Emma drifted in and out of a medicated sleep, she thought she saw her mother's face. It was soft and kind, her lips moving as though whispering something. Emma reached out weakly, But her mother disappeared into the shadows of the room. "Mom," she whispered, tears slipping from her eyes. Little did Emma know, the truth about the other car would soon come to light, a truth that would crush her already fragile heart. The hospital room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of Emma's heart monitor. The faint hum of voices drifted through the hallway, reminder that life outside continued even as hers felt like it had stopped. In the stillness of the night, Emma lay awake, her mind a storm of memories and regrets. She replayed her parents' warnings, the sharp tone of her father's voice, and the pleading look in her mother's eyes. Each moment of rebellion, now, felt like a dagger twisting in her chest. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the door. Claire, the nurse, stepped inside, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I thought you might like some company," Claire said softly, pulling a chair close to the bed. Emma didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, the weight of guilt too heavy for words. Claire sighed, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her uniform. "I've seen a lot of patients come through these halls, Emma, and I've learned that carrying guilt like yours, it doesn't help anyone." Emma turned her head slightly, her voice hoarse. "How can I not feel guilty? Liam's dead. The people in the other car, they're dead too, and it's all because of me." Claire's face softened, but she said nothing. She reached out and took Emma's hand, her grip warm and reassuring. For the first time since the accident, Emma allowed herself to cry openly, her sobs echoing through the quiet room. The next day, Emma drifted between wakefulness and sleep, her dreams fragmented and haunting. In one, she was back at the party. The music was too loud, the lights too bright, and Liam's laughter echoed unnervingly. She reached out to stop him as he stumbled toward the car, but her legs wouldn't move. In another, she was in her parents' living room. Her mother stood by the window, her face etched with worry, while her father paced the floor. They seemed to be waiting for something or someone. When Emma woke, her pillow was damp with tears. She stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of her dreams, but they only left her feeling more lost. In the afternoon, Dr. Patel, the attending physician, entered her room. He was a tall man with a calm demeanor and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. "Emma, how are you feeling today?" he asked, pulling up a stool beside her bed. She shrugged weakly. "Like I'm alive when I shouldn't be." Dr. Patel didn't flinch at her bluntness. "Survivor's guilt is common after an accident like this. It's okay to feel what you're feeling." Emma turned away, her voice bitter. "You don't understand. I didn't just survive, I caused it. I got in the car with Liam. I should have known better." The doctor hesitated, his gaze flickering to the clipboard in his hands. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you about the accident." Her heart clenched. "What is it?" He exhaled deeply. "The occupants of the other car, they were your parents, David and Linda." Emma's world collapsed. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not possible. They were at home. They were on their way to look for you," Dr. Patel said gently. "The police found the address of the party on your mother's phone. They must have been trying to bring you back home safely." Emma's cries filled the room, raw and unrelenting. The revelation left Emma numb. Her parents, her loving, protective parents, had died because of her choices. The weight of her guilt now felt unbearable. Claire entered the room later that evening, her expression cautious. She placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Emma," Claire said softly. Emma turned her tear-streaked face toward the nurse. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Claire hesitated, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I wanted to, but I didn't know how. You were already carrying so much." Emma's chest heaved as she tried to steady her breathing. "I need to say goodbye to them," she whispered. Claire nodded. "We can arrange that." 2 days later, Claire wheeled Emma into the hospital's small chapel. It was quiet and dimly lit, with candles flickering in every corner. A picture of her parents rested on the altar, surrounded by white flowers. Emma stared at the photograph. Her father's strong, reassuring gaze and her mother's warm, gentle smile felt like a knife to her chest. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. Tears streamed down her face as she poured out her heart. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have stayed home. If I could take it all back, I would." She reached out a trembling hand to touch the edge of the photograph. "I love you both so much. I hope you can forgive me." Claire stood silently behind her, giving her space, but ready to step in if needed. As Emma sat in the quiet of the chapel, she felt the faintest sense of peace. It wasn't forgiveness. She wasn't ready to forgive herself, but it was a start. She knew the road ahead would be long and painful. But for the first time, she felt a tiny flicker of hope. Emma stayed in the hospital chapel long after Claire left her alone. The candles flickered softly, casting shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. She stared at the photograph of her parents, her thoughts a storm of what-ifs and regrets. What if she had just stayed home that night? What if she had listened instead of arguing? Would they still be alive? Her mind conjured memories she thought she'd forgotten. Her dad teaching her to ride a bike, his booming laughter when she stumbled into a bush. Her mom's soothing voice when she was sick, the way she always knew how to calm Emma's fears. "I didn't deserve you," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "You were too good to me." She stayed there until exhaustion pulled her back to her hospital bed. The nurse wheeled her out silently, her heart aching for the girl, who now carried a grief so profound it seemed to age her overnight. A few days later, Emma was startled by the arrival of a visitor, Chloe. She stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, her makeup smudged and her eyes red from crying. "Emma," Chloe started, her voice barely audible. Emma's heart tightened. Seeing Chloe brought back memories of the party, of Liam, of the choices she made. "What are you doing here?" Emma asked, her tone sharp. I heard what happened," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to see if you were okay." "Okay," Emma snapped, anger bubbling to the surface. "Do I look okay, Chloe? My parents are dead. Liam's dead. I'm the reason for all of it." Chloe flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I told you to come to the party, but I didn't know it would." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Emma stared at her, torn between anger and the faint flicker of understanding. Chloe hadn't driven the car. She hadn't forced Emma to leave her house. But her encouragement had been a piece of the puzzle, a piece that now felt heavier than it should. "I shouldn't have listened to you," Emma said finally, her voice softer but no less pained. "But it wasn't just you. I made the choice. I should have stayed home." Chloe nodded, wiping her face with trembling hands. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I'll never forgive myself for this." Emma didn't reply. But as Chloe left, she couldn't help but wonder if they were both carrying guilt that neither of them deserved to bear alone. A week later, Emma was discharged from the hospital. Claire wheeled her to the front door, where her Aunt Susan waited. Susan was a quiet woman, her face lined with worry as she helped Emma into the car. "I'll take care of you," she said softly. "Don't worry about anything." The drive home was silent, the car filled with an unspoken tension. Emma stared out the window, the familiar streets now seeming alien. When they arrived at her house, Emma hesitated on the front steps. The door stood ajar, revealing a home that felt impossibly empty. Inside, the house was exactly as they had left it. Her mother's favorite blanket lay draped over the couch, and her father's coffee cup still sat on the kitchen counter. It was a time capsule of a life that no longer existed. Emma stood in the living room, her chest tightening. She couldn't imagine living here without them. "I can stay if you'd like," Susan offered, her voice gentle. Emma shook her head. "I need to be alone." As Susan left, Emma sank onto the couch, clutching her parents' blanket. The silence was deafening. The nights were the worst. In the quiet darkness of her bedroom, Emma could hear the echoes of her parents' voices, their laughter, and their arguments. She could almost hear her dad calling her name from downstairs or her mom humming as she folded laundry. But it was all in her mind. One night, unable to bear the stillness, Emma opened her parents' bedroom door. The faint scent of her mother's perfume lingered in the air. Her father's reading glasses sat on the nightstand, a book lying open beside them. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the comforter. Her throat tightened as she imagined them here, asleep and safe, before everything changed. "I miss you," she whispered into the darkness. For hours, she sat there, the weight of the room pressing down on her like a physical force. Emma couldn't stop thinking about Chloe. The guilt in her friend's eyes mirrored her own, and it was clear Chloe was struggling as much as she was. One afternoon, Chloe showed up unannounced. She stood on the porch, wringing her hands nervously. "I need to talk to you," Chloe said. Emma hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. They sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. "I haven't been able to sleep," Chloe admitted, her voice breaking. "I keep thinking about what I said, how I pushed you to come. If I hadn't done that..." Emma cut her off. "It wasn't just you, Chloe. I made my own choices. We both did." Chloe's tears spilled over, her face crumpling. "I don't know how to live with this, Emma. I feel like I've ruined everything." Emma looked at her, seeing her own pain reflected back. "We can't change what happened, but we can decide what we do now." They sat in silence, the weight of their grief hanging between them. For the first time, Emma felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt since the accident, the possibility of moving forward. Weeks passed, and Emma continued to wrestle with her emotions. The house still felt unbearably empty, but she began to notice small changes. Dust gathered on the picture frames. Flowers left by well-meaning neighbors wilted in their vases. One morning, while sorting through the mail, she found an envelope addressed to her. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky yet deliberate. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Emma's heart raced as she unfolded it. "Dear Emma, I don't know if you remember me, but I was the nurse who stayed with you that night in the hospital. I've thought about you every day since then. I've seen pain and loss before, but yours was different. I could see the weight you were carrying even when you didn't speak. I want you to know something. Your parents loved you deeply. I know that doesn't erase the guilt, but maybe it can remind you that love can survive even the worst of circumstances. They would want you to heal. They would want you to live. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." Claire Emma's hands trembled as she reread the letter. For the first time, she considered the possibility that her parents' love hadn't ended with their lives. Emma decided to visit her parents' graves the next day. The cemetery was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass. 2 simple headstones marked their final resting place, their names etched in bold letters. She knelt down, running her fingers over the cold stone. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I miss you both so much. Every day, I think about what I could have done differently." Her voice cracked as she continued. "But Claire's letter made me realize something. You wouldn't want me to drown in this guilt, would you? You'd want me to do better, to be better." The wind rustled the trees around her as though answering her words. Emma stayed there for hours, speaking to her parents, pouring out her heart. When she finally left, she felt a small, fragile sense of peace. The visit to the cemetery marked a turning point for Emma. She began to think about how she could honor her parents' memory. One night, as she sifted through old photos, she found a picture of them at a community event. Her father was speaking to a group of teenagers, and her mother stood beside him, smiling proudly. Emma remembered how her parents had always believed in helping others. That night, she made a decision. She would use her story to make a difference. She started by writing an essay about the accident, detailing her choices and the devastating consequences. It was raw and painful to put into words, but it felt necessary. She submitted it to a local newspaper, hoping it might reach someone who needed to hear it. When the essay was published, the response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from people who had lost loved ones to reckless driving, from teenagers who promised to think twice before making similar decisions, and from parents who thanked Emma for her courage. Encouraged by the response to her essay, Emma agreed to speak at a local high school assembly. The thought of standing in front of a crowd terrified her, but she knew it was important. The auditorium was packed. Students whispered to one another as Emma took the stage, her hands trembling. She took a deep breath and began. "My name is Emma, and I want to tell you a story about the choices I made and the consequences that followed." As she spoke, the room grew silent. Emma recounted the argument with her parents, the party, the accident, and the devastating loss of her parents. Her voice broke as she described the moment she learned they were the ones in the other car. "I can't undo what happened," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But if my story can stop even one person from making the same mistakes, then maybe their loss won't be in vain." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Emma felt a wave of relief, but also something deeper, purpose. Chloe was waiting for Emma backstage after the assembly. She wrapped Emma in a tight hug, her tears falling freely. "You were amazing," Chloe said, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Emma smiled through her own tears. "Thanks, Chloe. I couldn't have done this without you." Over the next few weeks, Emma and Chloe grew closer. They began to talk openly about the accident, sharing their guilt and grief in a way that felt healing. One evening, Chloe suggested they start a group for teens who had experienced loss or trauma. "We could call it Second Chances," she said. Emma nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I like that." The group quickly gained traction. They held meetings at the community center, where teens shared their stories, their struggles, and their hopes. For the first time since the accident, Emma felt like she was building something good out of the tragedy. The Second Chances group grew faster than Emma could have imagined. Teenagers from all over the community came to share their stories of loss, of bad decisions, of redemption. Each meeting was filled with raw emotion, but also with hope. Emma often found herself moved by their courage. One boy spoke about losing his sister in a drunk driving accident. A girl shared how her parents' divorce had pushed her to the edge until she found solace in the group. Emma realized that her story had created a ripple effect, inspiring others to open up and heal. Her parents had always believed in the power of community, and now Emma was continuing their legacy in a way she never thought possible. One day, after a particularly emotional group meeting, Chloe lingered behind. She fidgeted with her hands, avoiding Emma's gaze. "I need to tell you something," Chloe said hesitantly. "I've been holding on to it for a while." Emma raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Chloe took a deep breath. "I was the one who told Liam you were coming to the party. I thought it would make you happy. I didn't know it would." She trailed off, tears streaming down her face. Emma felt a pang of anger, but it was quickly overshadowed by sadness. Chloe had been carrying this guilt all along, and Emma knew the weight of it too well. "It wasn't your fault," Emma said softly. "We both made mistakes that night, but blaming ourselves won't bring anyone back. The best we can do is try to make something good out of it." Chloe nodded, her shoulders shaking with relief. For the first time, they hugged without the shadow of the accident hanging over them. Months passed, and Emma began to feel more like herself again. She returned to school, started volunteering at the community center, and even began writing a book about her journey. The book became her way of processing everything she had been through. Each chapter was a painful but cathartic reflection on her choices, her loss, and her path to healing. One evening, as she sat at her desk, she found herself writing about her parents. She described her father's booming laugh and her mother's warm hugs. She wrote about their arguments and their love, their flaws and their strengths. When she finished the chapter, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "I hope I'm making you proud," she whispered, looking at the framed photo of her parents on her desk. On the anniversary of the accident, Emma and Chloe organized a memorial event for victims of reckless driving. The community center was filled with candles, photos, and messages of love and remembrance. Emma stood at the podium, her heart pounding. She looked out at the crowd, her friends, her Aunt Susan, Claire, and even some of the teenagers from her group. "Tonight is about remembering those we've lost," Emma began. "But it's also about celebrating the lives they lived and the lessons they taught us." She spoke about her parents, about their love for each other and for her. She talked about how their memory had inspired her to help others. By the end of her speech, the room was filled with tears and applause. Emma stepped down from the podium, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. Emma sat on the front steps of her house, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. Chloe joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You've come a long way, you know," Chloe said, handing Emma a mug. Emma smiled. "We both have." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the warmth of the tea grounding them. Emma glanced at Chloe, her voice soft but determined. "I think I've finally forgiven myself. And I think I'm ready to move forward." Chloe nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "Your parents would be so proud of you, Emma." Emma looked up at the sky, imagining her parents watching over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to embrace it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma stood up, a sense of calm washing over her. She turned to Chloe with a small smile. "Let's make the most of this second chance," she said. And together, they stepped into the house, leaving the past behind and walking toward a brighter future.